All right. Um, Welcome everyone again in week 8. So this week's lecture we are going to discuss decentralization system, or rather decentralization in Papua New Guinea. Decentralization is an important aspect of any countries that adopts the representative democratic or democracy system. So Papua New Guinea is no exception, and we are going to look at the decentralization and its arguments, critics, factors, and how it's applied in Papua New Guinea context. This discussion will not be not centered on the public policy style of discussion of decentralization, but we are going to look at the political aspect of decentralization system in Papua New Guinea. So before we talk about decentralization, there are two arguments when it comes to decentralization. People like us in the politics and like to side on one argument, and people in the public policy space like to side on the other argument. The two arguments can be broken down into two. The efficiency argument that is mostly advocated by the public policy scholars, public policy people, and the empowerment argument that is advocated or mostly advocated by us in the political science space. Now, to find a balance between these two views is very important in trying to understand the decentralization system. And in particular in Papua New Guinea, trying to understand these two views of efficiency and effectiveness on one hand and empowerment on the other hand. So this will be the basis of our discussion today when we talk about decentralization system. We are going to focus more on the political aspect or the political side of decentralization and look at whether decentralization system in Papua New Guinea is empowering our people at the expense of public service delivery is concerned. So most of the discussion in relation to decentralization system in Papua New Guinea is focused on the public policy space. By the end of 1950s, those that are taking public policy may have come across the idea of new public policy management, or the new public policy management. The old public policy or public administration is more focused on big government and bureaucratic process. The new, what is called the new public policy era or new public admin, is more focused on efficiency and effectiveness of the public management. And that argument has trickled down into decentralization as well. So you will see this argument of effectiveness of decentralization being heard out or being talked about mostly in terms of dealing with decentralization. All right, so we'll start. I'll go through the basic frameworks of decentralization, and then later we'll dive deep into looking at Papua New Guinea's decentralization system. All right, so what is decentralization? Basically, decentralization or decentralization system, it talks about the transfer of power from the central government to the local or regional government, the transfer of that power. Why is it important? Because it basically enhances local government, brings decision making closer to the people. So this is the idea of representative democracy. We want our people to at least ever sense or ever feel of the government being present wherever they are. If they are in the remotest part of Papua New Guinea, they need to feel government presence. So through the means of decentralization, that enhance government's visibility and presence in the most remotest part of Papua New Guinea. When it happens, it sort of fulfills the idea of representative democracy. Now, how do you achieve this decentralization? Most notably through these three types of decentralization here. It can be either through fiscal decentralization, administrative decentralization, or political decentralization. Now, fiscal decentralization deals with money. This involves budget, financing, expenditure, revenue, taxation. This all covers the fiscal decentralization. So in other words, the government in Waigani can either control fiscal decentralization by directing funds to the provinces or tax, or let the provinces generate revenue and generate their own income, okay? Or control their own finances. Waigani is to delegate. Provinces are mandated to control or disperse the funds. So when there is power, distribution of financial powers, that deals with fiscal decentralization. Administrative power or administrative decentralization. So for example, you have a national department of works here. I don't know where they are located. Then you have provincial works. Okay, this is an indication that can tell you, this is an example of administrative decentralization, where some powers and functions of the central government is given to the provincial government. And this is where, in political science, where we like to look at, analyze, and discuss the political aspect of decentralization. Political aspect of decentralization mainly concerns decision making, roles and responsibilities at the local level. And we will deal with that when we go through the lecture here. All right, so these are the three types of decentralization. Let's take a look at some argument, or you can say nature of decentralization. So in the OECD report, report about the performance and functions of developing countries, this report highlighted that although fiscal, administrative, and political decentralization, the three types of decentralization, they should not be isolated. They are interconnected. So all these three types of decentralization drives the overall decentralization mechanism. Now, balancing those three types of decentralization is a matter of challenge by successive governments, both here in Papua New Guinea and elsewhere. So a successful decentralization strategy requires the balancing of these three types of decentralization. Now, in our case, and the reading that I put out, it talks about this, an effort in trying to balancing these three types of decentralization. So how is PNG attempted to balance this aspect in its decentralization efforts? So this is our concern here. We're going to look at how Papua New Guinea is trying to manage to balance these three aspects of decentralization. Now, in looking at that, in trying to answer that, or trying to talk about the three aspects of decentralization and how Papua New Guinea manages decentralization, we first look at the factors or the determinants of decentralization. The determinants of political decentralization. Now, there was a study by Spina, an article that he wrote in 2013. That article found out that government stability strong ethno-regionalist party drive decentralization. So for example, a successful decentralization to occur, it requires political stability. Okay? Political stability is very important for decentralization. Now, the report also found out that in those countries, ideological views or ideologies about decentralization are less important. Okay, you can see that in Papua New Guinea. Political parties do not put in their party policies platforms about decentralization. Okay? So that means that Papua New Guinea, the ideology behind or the ideological argument of decentralization is sometimes irrelevant. So here, the paper found out that party ideology was less influential in promoting decentralization. Okay, you don't see our political parties in election talk about decentralization. You only see our governors who come out and advocate for decentralization. Now, in looking at that, how does these factors apply to PNG or Papua New Guinea? Now, what local factors have influenced decentralization in Papua New Guinea politics, and how do they compare to other developing countries? So we are more focused about factors, especially local factors that affect decentralization. So in our country, the national politics is driven by local factors, or should I say, the nation state is driven by local politics. If you want to understand the national politics, the national state of Papua New Guinea, you have to understand the local politics. And this is at the heart of decentralization. Now, decentralization scholarship or literature studies, in cases like Papua New Guinea, there has been very few research done about analyzing decentralization system. So there needs to be an update of further inquiry, research into understanding decentralization in Papua New Guinea. The last study that tries to attempt this decentralization was by Axlin, May, Kwagelu. These are the authors. I think probably most of you in the public policy space may have come across these authors here in your assignments or assessments. So these authors here provided strong foundations strong foundation into looking at decentralization in Papua New Guinea. In most of these analyses, okay, most of it lacks a political lens. Most of it tends to talk about the effectiveness, efficiency model of decentralization, supply and demand of decentralization. So I'll give you an example. So the idea about efficiency is more towards strengthening the institutions. So if you want to strengthen decentralization, let's look at the process of decentralization. Let's look at strengthening the local government. Let's look at strengthening, let's say, the government procurement system in the way funds are delivered. So much of the analysis is more focused on the effective and efficient model. However, less of studies conducted have been rather not so much focused on the political dynamics of decentralization. And this is where our discussion is. Because when you talk about the processes, the systems in place, the procurement of goods and services and expenditure, at the end of the day, the people that drives this decentralization systems are human beings. They are part of a society, they are part of a village, community, and it is their conversation, their decision making that influence the processes. So why not we try to shift our attention to these people here and study their behaviors in terms of making important decisions about decentralization in our country. So probably the paper that I posted up, it's an attempt to discuss the political aspect of decentralization. Let's look at the key factors here. So this will be the key factors that we will mostly focus our discussion on. So most of the efficiency and effective model of studies have paid less attention to the role of members of parliament in the way they shape decentralization policies. We have seen after 1976 the dominance of national MPs. So national level politicians wield significant power. So their decisions have greatly influenced this decentralization in Papua New Guinea. They have significant power and influence decentralization efforts. Secondly, we have not so much talked about, again, politicians, district and provincial politicians. I'll give you an example. You have your district MPs are not in good terms with your provincial MPs. So there is a growing disparities between the provincial MPs and the district MPs. Why are the provincial MPs calling for autonomy and are not supported by the national MPs? So that is another area to look at, district versus provincial MPs, and the growing dominance of the district MPs. Why do you have DDA Act implemented or came about in 2014? This is an indication of the dominance of the national MPs over the provincial MPs or provincial governors. And when discussing decentralization, we cannot discuss decentralization without talking about the concept of autonomy, okay? Support for provincial autonomy. Because support of provincial autonomy in our country is supported, mostly advocated by the governors and not the national MPs. Why are our governors calling for autonomy and not being overwhelmed or supported by the national MPs? And finally, political instabilities or instability. We know our country has faced a lot of challenges to motions of vote of no confidence, and that related to the kind of structure, ethnic structure that we have. Okay, Papua New Guinea politics is fragmented and clientelistic. That complicates the decentralization process and policy as well. So Papua New Guinea is unique when discussing decentralization. So PNG's experience with decentralization is unique due to these complex and sometimes opposing forces. So these four factors that we will be looking at and talking about. Now, before the four factors here, let's give a context behind the decentralization system or discussion. So decentralization actually came about as a result of the CPC report, the Constitutional Planning Committee report. Now the vision of decentralization or the vision of the CPC report here, again, and in addition to that, the Bougainville experience. 1st September 1975, Bougainville wanted to break away from Papua New Guinea. So during that time, a compromise had to be done, and that compromise came in the form of decentralization. The Somare government wanted a centralized government, a big government, all right, following the colonial legacy. But the Somali government, their end was forced by the events on Bougainville. But the vision for decentralization, okay, was captured in the CPC report. So the CPC report talks about independence and self-rule, and independence was not just about national sovereignty, but also empowering the local people, all right? So the empowerment argument here was captured in the CPC report. So the decentralization discussion started off as a way to empower our people. So we will see it started off from empowering our people towards the efficiency and effectiveness of the system. So when you empower people, that's where local importance of local government come in, focus on local government. So decentralization was seen as essential to making government accessible and responsive to the people. So when you have, let's say, an office that is situated in the remotest part of our country, let's say Telefomin, a government office, that is an indication of empowering our people. Our people will know that there is a government service available for them and they can participate in this idea of representative democracy. And I'll quote here CPC report. It states that power must be returned to the people. Government service must be accessible to the people. This is a powerful statement here. It states that every Papua New Guinean should be empowered through the decentralization system. Okay? By saying that, not saying that your MP will control DDA, sit in Port Moresby and making decisions of how your district should be run. When you start doing that, then you are focusing on process and forgetting this important aspect which was captured by the CPC in our constitution. States that power should be returned to the people. Power should not be in the hands of national MPs. Power should be returned to the people. So the elevations of decentralization here through CPC report laid the groundwork for subsequent decentralization efforts. It was upon this idea here in the CPC report that led to the creation of the 1976 Organic Law on the Provincial Government System. All right, the 1976 Organic Law on the Provincial Government System. So the key objectives of the first Organic Law, did you all, I think, attend the first or the second session of PNG Update where Dr. Thomas Webster spoke something on decentralization. So he said that we should repeal the 1995 Organic Law and we should promote the 1976 Organic Law. Probably I'll share that Facebook post here. Well, his statement is in line with what we are saying here. So he's arguing that the current reform after 1995 is not working because so much attention is not focused on the people, but on the process and the systems. And who is in charge of the process and the systems? The national MPs. But the objective here of the 1976 reform here was to create the creation of a provincial government system. Importantly here, calls for a directly elected provincial parliaments with powers to address local needs. Directly elected, remember that. All right? So our people back in the provinces has a right to directly elect their provincial MPs or provincial premiers during the time. And the 1976 also allows for autonomy. Okay, provincial governments had the potential for significant autonomy in policy implementation. They don't have to rely on Waigani. They have power for important decision making in the province. So what we are experiencing is our governors are calling for autonomy. They're basically calling for the old organic law in the provincial government system as opposed to the 1995 reform. Now, the challenge of the old reform is that when Somare government decided to make a compromise by creating 20 provinces, not all those 20 provinces are capable of administering themselves. Some provinces are capable, some are not. Some needed support assistance, significant funding, significant support for the provinces to be able to be independent. So it's just my opinion. What the government should do at that time was to allow significant autonomy to those provinces that have the capacity and the resources to do so, while other provinces should be taken care by the central government. So when they start giving all the provinces equal amount of, let's say, power and status, that led to a lot of complications, because most of these provincial government, did not know how to administer or run the provinces. There was significant lack in human resource and bureaucrats, let's say public service, to do so. So that was the challenge by the old provincial government system, that most of these other provinces were facing significant challenges in trying to keep up with the pace of the provincial government system. So by 1983, an amendment was passed on the floor of Parliament. And now it allowed for the suspension of provincial government for non-performance. So the dominance of national MPs actually started through this amendment here in 1983. Now the national government now has the power to suspend provincial government. Now it led to the pattern of various suspension and had to deal with non-performance and financial mismanagement that led to the 1995 reform. So by 1995, most provincial governments had been suspended, or at least once has been suspended. But if you read the literatures and if you read the politics, by 1976 to 1995, provincial premiers who were directly elected were given a hard time or hard run of giving the national MPs a very difficult time. If, let's say, for example, the provincial premiers is a PPP candidate and the national MP is a National Alliance candidate from two different factions. Those two parties, are not, or what will I say, do not see eye to eye. Now that affects the overall administration, political administration of the province. When it comes to national election, it is the provincial MPs, provincial premiers that has the upper hand. They had significant influence on base support. They can swing votes and affect the national MPs. Access to parliament. So within that, national MPs national MPs came together and tried to suppress the provincial MPs. Started off in 1983 and then finished at 1995. So we'll look at the 1995 reform here. So by 1995, replacement, the organic law replaced the 1995 organic law replaced the 1976 organic law. Important here is that it replacement of a direct election. Now provincial assemblies become indirectly elected. When you remove directly elected provincial MPs, you are disempowering the people. You are placing significance on efficiency, process, and systems, and you are suppressing the people, okay, through appointed assemblies. So provincial assemblies became indirectly elected, and now when they become directly elected and indirectly elected and appointed assemblies, the provincial MPs now are at the mercy of the national MPs. So it sort of defeats the purpose of a representative democracy at the national level. When you have an indirectly elected National Assembly, it is an authoritative structure being put in place. And that defeats the argument of empowerment and defeats the idea of a representative democracy. So we are in our country having at the national level a directly elected national parliament, but at a provincial level an indirectly appointed provincial parliament. Now that defeats the purpose of a representative democracy, the idea of it. And this is where the rise of national MPs now supersedes, okay, efforts of decentralization. People are not in control anymore. People are at the mercy of the national MPs. When you have a structure that is, or an authoritative structure based on indirectly appointed provincial assemblies. It shifts its focus, the 1995 reform shifts the focus. Okay, the reform emphasized on service delivery over political autonomy. Political autonomy and empowerment on one end, service delivery and efficiency model on the other hand. So a lot of discussion about decentralization has been towards focusing more on strengthening service delivery at the expense of autonomy and empowerment of our people. So when we focus on strengthening service delivery, we don't know that at behind strengthening the idea of strengthening service delivery, the system itself is giving prominence to the national MPs. Impact on governance. When that reform came in, it weakens the provincial government system. The reform was seen as a centralizing measure, reducing the influence of provincial governments. So when that happened, the provincial governors now are become insignificant to the old decentralization process. That is why the provincial governments after 1995 are calling for autonomy. Why are they calling for autonomy? Because the provincial government structure is not conducive enough for provincial government system to operate. So when that happened, most of the powers now are centered at Waigani and not the provinces. And then the introduction of local government, the LLGs. The reform provided constitutional recognition to LLGs, shifting some power closer to the local communities. When LLGs were created, it also makes the role of the provincial government redundant, or become useless. So you see, the creation of local government system now, you create local government and you park DDA on top of local government. And then you talk about strengthening service delivery. But politically, in political science, we see that those structures are not strengthening service delivery. It's enforcing and strengthening the role of national MPs. So the provincial governors are complaining that they are not factored in this decentralization reform here. So they are calling for autonomy. Why? Because they see that their role is meaningless in the scheme of things. So that is why Dr. Webster has called on to complete repealing of the 1995 reform. And this is sort of a timeline. So in politics, we study the transaction of power. Any amendment to a certain organic law in parliament is a statement of transfer of power. So by 1995, we see that the 1995 to 2014 introduction of District Development Authority, all those laws here, and I'll read the 1996 Constitutional Amendment to Organic Law and Provincial Government, Section 33A, okay, talks about Section 33 officers. So it established what is called the Joint District Budget Planning and Priorities Committee. Now that is an important, the JDP BPC itself gave or started the rise of national MPs being to control the finances to the local government. Formerly, they had to go to the provinces to fight for funding to the local districts. Now through JDP BPC in 1996, it situated national MPs to have significant control over funding. And then 1997, the Local Level Government Administrative Act, Intergovernment Relation and Functions Act. So you can see IR's amendment to IRA 2009, Constitutional Amendment to OLPLG 2014. After 1995, the laws here were consolidating and strengthening the national MP's role in terms of dictating development. All these laws here apply to financial incentives, money coming straight to the national MP's basket. And the final blow to that was the creation of the DDA Act. And now that puts the national MP at the focus of decentralization. So we have a mini dictator running around in our decentralization system. You talk about Kim Jong-un in North Korea. We are having about 100 and something Kim Jong-un operating in our districts, if we can put it bluntly, because they dictate government service, resources, revenues, everything. You want development, you go to the national MPs. So that is why Dr. Thomas Webster was calling to repeal the 1995 reform. Here, the rise of the district development authorities. Well, let's talk about DDA. Here, initially proposed in 2006, DDAs were formally established in 2014 and give district more control over development funds and decisions. So DDAs were created to give more control of national MPs over important financial decisions in the province. Now, the culmination of it, so the role of MPs. Now they sit as the chair of the DDA boards. They control, dictate developments in the province. So they control significant financial or significant resources and decision-making powers. Funding influence, electoral funds, DDAs receive extensive funding. Before it was 10 million kina. Now I don't know, probably 2 million or 5 million, not sure, but significant money have been going to the district, to this district service improvement funds. And you know what? The DSIPs are not legally tied. Meaning that this is a disbursement fund. So it's very hard for citizens to take our MPs to court because there's no basis to take our MPs to court over the DDA, DSIP and PSIPs. So this has further shifted power and resources from the provinces to the districts. Now, as this was happening, we had on the other side of decentralization and Papua New Guinea politics, the Bougainville conflict. So Bougainville tend to set the pace for decentralization discussion. So it's worth talking about Bougainville when discussing decentralization as well. Now we look at the Bougainville Peace Agreement in 2001. So we know at the background of Bougainville conflict, the Panguna mine, okay, had led to a long civil war. And the promise by the Bougainville Peace Agreement was for independence, or autonomy and independence. Autonomy should come first before independence. So the Bougainville Peace Agreement provided for a high level of autonomy and deferred referendum on Bougainville future status. So the idea was we give them significant autonomy here so that sometime in the future when they decide to go for independence, they'll go for independence. Otherwise, they have significant power and authority to have a say of, let's say, developing or significant power and authority to administer Bougainville by the people of Bougainville. All right? So Bougainville's autonomy has set precedent for other provinces seeking similar arrangement. All right? So here, Bougainville's autonomy is different from the kind of autonomy that other provinces have been asking for. Our autonomy, aside from Bougainville, is different. All right? Rest of Papua New Guinea, the idea of autonomy started around 2017, 2015 because of the introduction of the DDA. So it came through the Intergovernment Agreement on Greater Autonomy in 2018. This is, I think, under the O'Neill government. Yes, signed by Peter O'Neill, okay, East New Britain, New Ireland, and Enga Province were pushing for greater autonomy. And that greater autonomy, okay, the main argument around that was purely on financial and administrative matters. It was not about empowering our people, but it's about that efficiency and effective model. Okay? So money talks. Okay, so the autonomy here is about financial and administrative arrangement here. Okay, that is different from Bougainville. Bougainville, they were allowed to run their own elections. Okay? So both the three types of decentralization was given in a full package to Bougainville. Okay, not so much in our case. All right, so the current issues. So the current decentralization framework is seen as overly complex and poorly coordinated. We have seen a very big decline in service delivery, and decentralization has not always led to improved services. And one reason would be the overlapping responsibilities and resource constraints. You have in the former model where you have the provincial government having in charge of service delivery. Now you pack DDA within the provincial government system. So overlapping of responsibility, when you create DDA, you have to fund DDA. We have to pay more taxes in funding DDAs as well. And the stupidity behind DSAP and PSCP funds. The typical Westminster system does not call for a member of parliament to become fund managers or develop their districts. Their sole responsibility is here at Waigani, in the parliament, to legislate laws. They're not supposed to be fund managers. So if you are trying to argue that your MPs should develop your districts, then you have a wrong mentality here. You should be arguing about your MPs passing or legislating laws on the floor of parliament, not complaining to your MPs about developing your districts. That is not their responsibility. So, the need for reform here. So there is a growing consensus that Papua New Guinea's decentralization system requires reform to address the shortcomings and improve governance at all levels. And understanding this historical context and political dynamics of decentralization in PNG is key to shaping this our future. So in this lecture here, the idea here that I want to bring out is the idea of, so basically the decentralization system that we have here in Papua New Guinea is so focused on effectiveness and service delivery. But we do not notice at the back of service delivery and effectiveness the growing dominance of national MPs. And the consequence is that the growing dominance of national MPs have created a dictatorial, authoritarian structure at the local level. And this is the problem of decentralization in our country. Our people are so in tune to the authoritative structure that they forget that they are supposed to be part of the decentralization system. It is because of them that these MPs are even existing at the first place. Now, in the final lecture on Monday, we will look at the part 2 of this decentralization challenges. We will look at the exact role of the MPs and how they behave in this decentralization structure.